All right, AP World History. We are going to assume that we got through this slide that we're looking at. If we went any further than this, you don't need to sit and listen to me yak about it. You can go ahead and just fast forward to catch up where we do, actually, I guess kind of get started with the video notes. But kind of thinking it's going to go down that way. So let me go ahead. I'm going to pop open to this slide right here, and this is where I'll get started. Okay, like I said, if we covered some of this in class, just fast forward over it. Ready? So 1917 will be the year that the United States gets involved in World War One. We'll tell you the quick and another kind of a bizarre story to go along with that assassination story. This one doesn't involve sandwiches. Here, before I get ahead of myself. So when we join World War One in April of 1917, this is kind of where we typically see that dropping of that triple entente describing the alliance, and then the allies now is going to be the term that will describe Great Britain, the United States, and France, okay, as the major allies. There'll be minor allies, but we're going to be mainly focused on those three. And good news, when we move over to World War II, the good guys, the country fighting with us, will also maintain that name, also be referred to as the Allies. Okay, we align ourselves with the British and the French because we see countries that have governments that are somewhat similar to ours. Both the French and the British do use some elements of democratic government. They have free elections, they have political parties, and all that kind of thing. And so it's kind of a natural fit for us. And then when we get to the rest of the story, make even more sense as to why we wouldn't have been joining Germany in this war, okay? And a lot of that has to do with a lot of the friction that had been building up between the United States and Germany from about from about 1915 onward. You will end up having in 1916 the sinking of the Lusitania, which is a British ship. But the Germans torpedo it. They have their U-boats, their submarines. They call them U-boats for underwater boats. It's Unterwasserboots, I think, is in German, but the nickname is U-boats. And it's the first war where we've seen that first real use of submarines, like we talked about. And the Lusitania. Just a second here. Check my facts. I knew when that came out of my mouth. Like, wait a minute, no. The sinking of the Lusitania came in 1915. There we go. Okay, and when that ship was sunk, 128 Americans were killed, along with about 1,200 other Europeans that were on the ship. One of those that once again makes the Germans look really, really bad. There were other U.S. ships that were sunk by the Germans as well, and their use of what they call unrestricted submarine warfare, which means that they would attack ships without any kind of warnings. There was, for a while, there was this kind of idea that there would be rules to the way they fight, and that usually they weren't. The intent wasn't to try to kill a bunch of people, as they wanted to sink the ship and the cargo that might be on it. And so a lot of times the submarines in the early part of the war would surface and say, hey, you've got half an hour to get everyone off board that ship, and then we're going to torpedo it. Okay, that would be your restricted submarine warfare. And again, it kind of like plays by rules, in a way. But of course, the Germans realized that wasn't gaining them the results that they wanted. And so surprise attack was the best route. And that gets us into that area of unrestricted submarine warfare. So that is a major point of friction between the United States and Germany, is the fact that they're determined to block any kind of shipping making its way to Britain or France. And we believe, in the freedom of the seas, and that we should be able to send U.S. ships across the Atlantic Ocean without fear of being, basically molested by these German U-boats. But again, major point of friction. Okay, kind of goes back and forth. There'll be a couple times the Germans apologize, and we'll use restricted, the restricted form of warfare. But then pretty soon they're back to unrestricted. Yeah, it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Okay, what tips things between the United States and Germany is a scandal that breaks out in early 1917 and revolves around what comes to be known as the Zimmermann telegram. British intelligence intercepts a message being delivered from Berlin to Germany's embassy in Mexico City. And the British are able to get this and break the code that the Germans are using. And what they find when they break this code and this message is that it is an offer from the German government to the Mexican government that proposes that Mexico should attack the United States, and that Germany would help Mexico to do this, and that the idea was that Mexico could gain out of this whole scheme. They could get all of their land that they had lost back in the 19th century, California, Southwest, the United States. All of that would be ceded back to Mexico. Okay, now for I guess to Mexico's benefit, they never even, when this message gets to them, they're just kind of like, no, thank you. So they never even remotely entertain the idea of actually doing this. But when the British get that message and get it decoded, they hand it to the United States. Okay, why would the British do something like that? Well, because the British desperately want the United States in this war. And they've been begging. It's kind of like, come on, we're all the same here. We have our shared history. We have these governments and kind of culture and ideals that are kind of the same. But the United States was still strongly anti-war, very, very neutral going into 1917, and really didn't want anything to do with it. But the Zimmermann telegram is kind of that the straw that breaks the camel's back. Like I said, already this friction over submarine warfare, and then to find out that Germany is plotting to try to entice one of our neighbors to attack us. That's it. And in April 1917, our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, goes to Congress, asks for a declaration of war, and Congress delivers. And so now the United States is in the war. And really that does get us more into this concept of World War I becoming more of a global war. Okay, I wouldn't say just because the United States. You also have warfare that is extending out to a lot of the colonies of the empires of some of these countries. So, Africa will be a perfect example. Germany has colonies. France and Britain have colonies. And so there is fighting that goes on in Africa. You have these, a lot of times, armies that are made up mainly of native indigenous people who are commanded by European officers, be they German or French or British. And they are fighting to basically to try to expand their territory and holdings in Africa and out in Asia. And so you get that aspect of a widening war, and a war that is more like what we can think of as a world war. Okay, also connected with the colonies is the use of colonial troops. Most, especially the British and the French, I would say a little bit more all over this, maybe than the Germans, but the British and the French pretty much let it be known to their colonies that they are somewhat obligated now to go fight for the empire. And if you had spent time in the trenches in the Western Front in France, you would have been bumping into, the African troops that the French brought up from their colonies in Africa, Indian troops that the British are bringing out from India. So it's an extension of some of that, migratory labor that had been going on during the era of imperialism, and now it's just pushing out. Now, a lot of times these colonial soldiers, they'll gladly volunteer, strangely enough, but really not so strange. They volunteer to fight for their, basically for their oppressors, for their colonizers. What they're hoping is that by doing that, by volunteering and fighting and doing whatever they can, that it potentially is going to open the doors to maybe some independence, like a reward. we helped you to win the war. Maybe in return for that, I don't know, maybe give us our independence, that kind of a thing. And, the Europeans kind of imply that there will be rewards for them in exchange for their service. And so it builds up a little bit of hope that, okay, we do our bit in this war, and, we might be free when this war is over and get our country back again, right? So you will see that the pretty extensive use of colonial troops. Okay, women will also play a major role in World War I. In some countries, the British are going to make very heavy use of women in the factories, munitions factories, things like that. The British, the United States, pretty much any country involved is also going to employ women in a nursing, medical aspect. To help out with patching up injured soldiers and that sort of thing. And then you will see a kind of limited number of countries that make use of women in combat roles. Russia, there's stories that some Russian armies will make use of women. It's something that will pop up again in World War II. Bulgaria, Serbia. So, more like on the eastern front of the fighting where you see some of that. It's not anything really extensive, but, it still does play enough of a role to where we'll give it a little bit of a mention there, right? So that is, I guess, another aspect we can think of as we're becoming more of a world war is, everyone's included. Everyone's included, okay? All right, our next section here, we just cut straight to the chase, and we get to the end of the war. I think I mentioned to you guys, if I didn't before, that, again, College Board does not expect you to know a bunch of battles and generals and that sort of thing. We want to know the role that technology plays, but then beyond that, just know that once the United States joins in with the Allies, it really begins to tip the scales in the favor of the Allies. The Germans launch one last major offensive to try to end the war before the United States can get too fully involved. They launch a major offensive in the spring of 1918, and for a while they're making good progress, and then it just runs out of steam. And from that point on, the United States is, every month more and more American troops are disembarking in France and heading to the front lines and helping the Allies to, at this point, begin to, outnumber the Central Powers, the Germans on the other side. Okay, so that will from there I'll fast forward to November of 1918. I think it's in October of 1918 that Kaiser Wilhelm is sat down by his generals and told that militarily there is no way Germany can win the war. They're just told, with the infusion of American troops now and American supplies and armaments, Germany has nothing to face that with. And back home on the home front in Germany, things are starting to fall apart. Food shortages, an unhappy public, starting to see the beginnings of some political dissolving and uproar going on, kind of a little mini revolution or attempted revolutions from different political parties. There's German communists, trying to stir up trouble. And so, Germany just has trouble, whether they look at the front lines and more of these American troops, but they also see a lot of trouble behind them back at home and a public that is quickly losing support for the war. Because they're barely hanging on in terms of food to feed their families and that sort of thing. So finally, in early November, the German military asks for an armistice, okay, which is a fancy word. Pretty much it means ceasefire. It's not the official end to a war. It's just kind of the part where it says, hey, let's stop shooting at each other, and then we can figure out how to officially end this thing. Okay, but the Germans ask for it first, so they are the ones that they're the ones that cry uncle, and with that the process begins, and the armistice is made official on November 11th of 1918, 11 o'clock in the morning. So the people talk about how the war unofficially ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, of the year. And if you're into numerology, that might mean something. I don't know. All right. But that is what gets the fighting to stop. All right. The very next year, we are going to have a meeting of what they refer to as the Big Four. And these are the political leaders of the United States, Great Britain, France, and then Italy is going to get thrown in there too, because remember they had joined during the middle of the war. They had flipped sides and joined in with the Allies. And even though they don't play a real significant role, they're given, I guess at least a seat at the big boy table. And this peace treaty, the meetings for this take place in Paris. And what's interesting is who isn't invited. First of all, Germany is not invited. Germany is told, we're going to get this figured out. We'll call you when you're ready. Okay. And so Germany is not going to be represented, which probably is a bad omen for them. Gathering together amongst these big four, we have at least two of the countries, the British and the French, who are mad for revenge on Germany. Again, they've fought this incredibly devastating war. The French especially. I mean, not only have they lost, I think, over 1 million soldiers, but significant property damage, especially in the northern part of France, where a lot of the Western Front was located. And the British had also suffered significant casualties. So, both of them, what's driving them is a demand or a desire for revenge against Germany. Okay. The United States is coming at this because, really we're only in the war in a real serious way for less than a year. We declare war in 1917. It takes almost a year for us to mobilize and get our troops moved over to Europe. So our experience is very different. We don't go through this full 4 years of, war of attrition and just, the disaster, on the Western Front. And the way it plays out for the British and the French. And so we have a very different attitude about this. And ours is forget about revenge. Revenge just kind of gets you on that, that whole, I don't know, like a little Ferris wheel where it's just, your revenge causes revenge, you get that in that whole cycle. And so instead, our president, Woodrow Wilson, presents to the British and the French his plan for what he considers to be more of a permanent peace, or this idea of peace without victory, which means we're not going to rub anyone's nose in this, and we're going to make a very fair peace out of it. And he presents what he calls his 14 points, which is Wilson's kind of like a blueprint for a long-term plan for peace. Okay. And with that, I'll just zip through these parts. We don't need to know all 14 points, but I'll give you the main parts. He's saying that all countries need to commit themselves to reducing the size of their militaries. Okay, cut back the size of the Navy. You don't need these gigantic standing armies because then you just end up using them in the end. All right, so reduce militaries, stop the arms races, that sort of thing. Okay, no secret treaties. Now, secret treaties hadn't played a major role in the start of World War I, but it complicated things. And so, if there's going to be any treaties, they need to be all, transparent, out in the open, that sort of thing. Okay, self-determination needs to be the rule of the day, meaning people get to choose their own governments. Okay, talked about this a little bit with the outbreak of the war. People should be able to choose their own government. It's not imposed from outside by outsiders. And then last but not least, when I do there we go. Wilson calls for the creation of a peace organization. Okay, it eventually will be created, called the League of Nations. And he sees this as a way of conflicts to be settled before they turn into a war. When two countries have an issue, they come to the League of Nations. They present their issue to all of the countries that belong to this organization, and the other countries act as kind of like mediators, and they work out a peaceful way of getting this all figured out instead of just go to guns. Okay. Like I said, I'll go with those four out of the 14, being those are biggies, and he presents this to the British and the French, the Italians, and the two main ones he needs in his corner are the British and the French, and they absolutely reject the vast majority of his 14 points. When he talks about arms races, their response is, if we don't compete in an arms race, we could have someone sneak up on us and end up with more military for power than we have. So we're not too hot on this idea of limiting military force. Secret treaties, they're just kind of, what, in the real world sometimes you need some treaties that are kind of back pocket. You got them in case you need them for an emergency. So they're not even really too cool on the idea of no secret treaties. Promoting self-determination, they absolutely are going to shut that one down, because if they embrace that, what about their colonies? All those colonies they have are the perfect example of everything that self-determination is not. And in effect, if they embrace self-determination, they have to give independence to all their colonies. So they completely shut that one down. The only one they're open to is this International Peace Organization. To the idea of the League of Nations, you're kind of like, okay, we're interested, we're listening, right? So you get that. And so from all this, they hammer out the official treaty, what will come to be known as the Treaty of Versailles. All right, and they will finally tell the Germans to go ahead, and you can now come to Paris, and we're going to let you know how you're being punished. Okay, and here is some of the punishments that Germany has to deal with. First of all, what they call the guilt clause of the Treaty of Versailles, which means Germany is forced to accept all blame for the war. Okay, again, this goes back to that whole, when Austria-Hungary goes to Kaiser and says, hey, we're going to do this thing to Serbia, you got our back, and Kaiser Wilhelm says, go ahead, you do what you want, we got you. Boom, that's where they're nailed. And so Germany is told, you have to take all the blame for the war. Forget about the alliances, forget about all the other, kind of hoopla that's going on. All of World War I is just your fault, Germany. Okay, so that is one that Germany has to accept. They have all of their colonies taken from them. They're going to be redistributed to the winning countries. They are going to lose territory. Some of it will be on the eastern side to help create a new country called Poland, a new country called Czechoslovakia. They're going to lose some land on the west side that will be ceded over to France. And then they're going to have the vast majority of their military power stripped away from them. They're allowed to have no air force. Their navy is reduced down to the size of like a Coast Guard, and they are limited to having an army of only 100,000 soldiers. Okay, I think at the peak of World War I, they had about 8 million men in uniform. So from 8 million, down to 100,000. I think the New York City police force is bigger than that. And so, yeah, that's what they're going to deal with on there. And then they also get a bill. They're going to told that they have to pay reparations mainly to Britain and France. And they are told that what they owe is the equivalent to what would be about $270 billion if we were thinking in more modern terms here. 270 billion of their German Deutschmarks. And this country, they have lost the war. They're impoverished. They have none of this, and it's going to create some real major issues. By the way, Germany only paid off these reparations at the only 15 years ago. It was 2010 when they made their final payments for the end of World War One. Well, we'll talk about what happens with reparations in World War II another day. But huge bill that they're slapped with. And Germany's told, if you don't accept these things, then we're just going to restart the war against you. But the only good thing about this with Germany is that the Allies had never marched into Germany. They had called for that armistice while they were still in the trenches on the Western Front. And so, no American, British, French boots had gone marching into Germany. And the threat is, if you don't accept everything that we've thrown at you here in the Treaty of Versailles, we'll restart the war and we will go marching into Germany and occupy you. So Germany feels like they have no choice. And as much as it angers them, they sign off on this. Okay. And that will get us to the consequences of World War I. And we're going to look at it this way. We have 4 monarchies that are in existence in 1914, and by 1918 are basically gone. The Russian monarchy is gone with their revolution. The Austro-Hungarian and German empires are gone with the loss of their leaders. Austria-Hungary is split up. They no longer have an empire. Germany is now defeated. Kaiser Wilhelm abdicates the throne and heads off to live basically in self-imposed exile in Holland for the rest of his life. The Ottoman Empire is no more. And so, this huge change to the political landscape of Europe and beyond. We are also going to see these new maps of not only Europe, like I talked about, creation of new countries, that sort of thing, but we're also going to see, which we'll revisit later, a major shift that is beginning to take place in the Middle East. And some of this is going to set up conditions in the Middle East that create the conflict and violence that exists in the Middle East to this very day. Okay, when we talk about the Middle East being this very, very, politically troubled part of the world, you can point to World War I and the direct effects of World War I in creating the conditions there. Like I said, we'll come back and revisit on that later. Okay, no one's going to really know it at the time. But another consequence of World War I, it's going to take a while. It's going to probably take really another world war. But the beginnings of the end of colonialism are going to begin to take place here. What all these colonial, these subjects that had signed up to help their countries are going to find that that they don't get anything in return for their service. They're told, thank you, now get back to work. Okay. But it's going to inspire more resistance. In India, the INC is going to pick up their efforts to try to push back against the British Raj. So, the end of colonialism doesn't happen until after World War II, but the seeds are being sown for that. Okay. You're also going to see the conditions that are going to create for the rise of communism and fascism. Communism in chiefly in Russia, where it's already taking root. But you're also going to see communism as a potential, seen as a threat by some in countries like France and Germany and Italy. The Russians are once the Bolsheviks take control, they're going to want to spread communism. I mean, they think it's the best government, the best way of approaching things, and they will be very aggressive in trying to basically, export communism out to other European countries. So you're going to have that going on. And then, of course, we'll soon enough here be getting into the story of the rise of the fascists in Italy under Benito Mussolini, and the rise of fascists in Germany, the Nazi Party under Adolf Hitler. And so those will be a couple of the consequences, and we'll see where the end of World War I plays directly into the rise of fascism in Italy and in Germany. Okay, and then we're also starting to. This is kind of where the United States has now stepped out there in a really big and bold way on the world stage. We've spent the last part of the 19th century kind of a slow growing power. Again, we didn't get completely involved in imperialism. We kind of dip our toes in with our little territories and banana republics. But now, we are seen as having a country that has the potential of being a major player on the world stage, and the beginning of a shift where everything had always been about Europe. They have the empires, they have the political power. And we start to see that now you have this new competing power on the other side of the Atlantic. Okay, and that is a process that also will be solidified by World War II. But it gets started with our brief but important role in World War I. Okay, and then the last one I'll leave you with, and some of you that have me world studies, you remember this story. There's no way of getting around that. The Germans are going to come out of the end of World War I feeling like they have been humiliated by the Allies. You beat us, but you decided to kick us while we were down. Being forced to accept full guilt for the war. A country with a very proud militaristic tradition, having all of its military, so to speak, taken away from it. And in Germany, there is going to be very quickly this sense of, we've been wronged, we have been, like I said, humiliated, and we need to get even. Okay, the picture down the bottom of the slide, and I'll finish off on this. But the picture down the bottom of the slide is a group of Germans who found themselves in a German field hospital on November 11th, 1918, when the armistice was announced. These guys were all in a hospital for various things, and one of the guys that was in there was recovering from a gas attack. He'd been taken a good shot of gas, chlorine gas, so not absolutely poisonous gas, but it kind of messed up his lungs, temporarily blinded him, and he's recovering in this hospital when a chaplain, German army chaplain, comes in and tells them that the war had ended and that Germany had surrendered. Okay, they had asked for the armistice. And this young guy who's working to recover from his gas he's an interesting case. He's a corporal in the German army. He's actually Austrian born, and he was a guy that before the war broke out was like a lost soul. He had all kinds of big plans for himself growing up. At one point, thought he was going to be an artist, but really just had zero direction. Up until 1914. It seemed like a guy who was destined just to become nothing in life. But he volunteered when the war broke out. Instead of volunteering for the Austro-Hungarian army, which he saw as being way too multicultural, he crossed the border and joined the German army. And apparently, as a soldier, as far as we know, very brave. He was decorated twice for bravery, awarded the Iron Cross, which kind of one of those medals that the Germans would give their troops who really distinguished themselves in combat, and played some real dangerous roles. Acted as a messenger at times, and so he's the guy that's having to carry messages, trench to trench, all of that. But him now getting the word that Germany had surrendered, he wrote about this later on in a book. And he said that the shock of it just took him by surprise, and he said that he rolled over in his little hospital cot, and he kind of fighting back the tears, but really he just said he started like screaming in rage into his pillow, and sobbing because it's like this war had been for nothing. The sacrifice he had made, friends of his who had died. Everything had been for nothing. And as he writes about this later on, sorry if you hear this weird noise in the background, it's my dog, he's snoring. He writes about this later on, and what he describes is that he has, I forget exactly how he words it, but in effect, almost kind of like an out-of-body experience. And he said that all of a sudden his life came into sharp focus and what he would do, and that all these weird dreams he had of artists and other things he'd kind of dabbled in. No, that all kind of falls to the side, and he realizes that his destiny is to become a leader. Okay, specifically a political leader, and that it is his destiny that he will lead Germany out of this horrible situation they find themselves in, defeated and humiliated, and that he, and who's this guy right here, all right, well, there's a little cross there on his picture. He, Adolf Hitler, okay, that is who this guy is, will be the one to lead Germany back to a place of respect and a country that will be feared and will have power once again. So the end of World War I plays a huge role in like I mentioned before, sowing those seeds for what will be World War II. Most of your historians are going to tell you you do not get World War II without World War I. They are so tightly linked, and at least in the European theater in Europe, it's going to be because of the experience of Germany coming out of that war and the extremism that it's going to create politically in Germany and allowing for the rise of the Nazi Party. Okay, but that'll be a story for another day. That will cover us for everything that we need for these notes. Okay, we'll see you again in the classroom.